Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and why it's critically important to believe in Dungeons and Dragons. So first of all, that's a shocking statement. I don't believe in Dungeons and Dragons, Scott. I play Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, there is this increasingly ridiculous concept that Dungeons and Dragons is a game. There are actually multiple channels now saying flat out that Dungeons and Dragons isn't the game. My channel isn't the only one just saying that anymore. Increasingly, people are like, this doesn't look like a game in any way. Some of the changes on Dungeons and Dragons that are completely unlike any game in the world is one, Dungeons and Dragons work on intellectual property is unprecedented. It has infiltrated in ways that commercial entities don't understand and cultural entities don't understand and many individuals don't understand. The way Dungeons and Dragons interacts with intellectual property is unprecedented. There's never been a product in human history that does what Dungeons and Dragons does. Increasingly, people are like, well, if it's a game, why doesn't anybody win? Why is its community, why are there crises for this game? Nobody cares about what Candyland does. Nobody cares why Candyland changes, right? Nobody cares if Candyland changes. Why do literally low millions of people get very upset if the tiniest word gets a single letter changed, right? Like, every single change on Dungeons and Dragons is a crisis, right? Like, and people are like, this doesn't look like a game, and they're right. It's not a game, right? Like, and increasingly, I'm not the only. There's like three channels that are on record now saying, Dungeons and Dragons is not a game. Bro, like, it's saying flat out, like it's not even pretended anymore, right? So that is increasingly important to understand. So I've been trying for like 5 years to explain to people why it's important to believe in Dungeons and Dragons, which is a shocking statement. And I think I'm there. So I'm going to explain it to you now. All right. It's critical to understand this. The salvation of humanity is completed and done, and it has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Any human who wishes to be saved can be, and that path is finished. It has nothing to do with Gary Gygax. It has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have the power to save anyone. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have the power to save a single human being. Okay, so why are we still talking? Because it does have the power to fulfill every human being, right? It has the power for human fulfillment. What is human fulfillment? Well, humans are incredible entities, and we have the ability to fulfill our value, to fulfill our work, right? And that's where Dungeons and Dragons came in. Gary Gygax built a system that allows humanity to fulfill its value, to fulfill what it's worthy of completing, to achieve all that it can achieve from a secular perspective. Dungeons and Dragons can allow every secular human to fulfill themselves. Okay? That's what it's here for. And Gary built a map to that fulfillment for every human being. Now, what is it? Well, it's combat, it's interaction, and it's exploration. He wrote it into the game from day one, right? It's the 3 pillars of Dungeons and Dragons. And that's why you need to believe in it, okay? So let's cut our way through it, all right? So what do you mean, Scott, right? So first of all, combat. It's the scariest and it's the most complicated, and we're going to deal with it first. The combat is virtual and it is internal. It is in no way, it's bloodless. It's completely divorced from violence because Gary didn't want humans to be violent anymore. He wanted to make a path where we could defeat dragons without violence, right? And so the combat in Dungeons and Dragons that is performed and defined, and all combat in Dungeons and Dragons is virtual. It is bloodless, right? There's no violence involved. It is literally imagination, right? Now, what happens at the table is one thing. What happens beyond the table, oh wait, Scott, beyond the table, did Gary want us to go beyond the table? He literally wrote it on every Dragon magazine, mastering the dungeon and beyond. Gary's intention for Dungeons and Dragons was never to, it wasn't a game to entertain. It was a tool to improve, grow, and transform every human, right? And to allow them to fulfill what they could achieve, to fulfill humans, not to save them, but to fulfill them, to fulfill specifically secular humans who have a distinct need, right? That people who are saved don't need, right? Like if a human has salvation, they don't need fulfillment, right? But if they don't have salvation, fulfillment will be all they ever receive. And Gary made a path for that, for secular people, which I think is pretty incredible. All right, so let's get all the way there. So what is the combat segment of human fulfillment in Dungeons and Dragons? Well, it is combating the 5 chromatic dragons. What are the 5 chromatic dragons? Ignorance, fear, intolerance, selfishness, and hopelessness. And Dungeons and Dragons gives every human an ability to combat those things within themselves, right? Without violence, without blood, without anger, right? It is a different type of combat. Gary Gygax rewrote combat and formed a new type of combat for humanity. A bloodless one, a one without. And why did he do that? Well, when he was just a tiny little, he was born to witness all of World War II. He saw the worst violence humanity had ever done upon humanity. He literally witnessed it, right? And as he was growing, he was like, this can't continue. I have to fix humanity. I have to allow people to fulfill themselves so they don't bomb each other out of existence, right? Like, so we don't literally rip the world in half with our own devices, right? And so he fixed it. He fixed, we don't, no, there's no need for violence anymore, right? Because Gary Gygax got rid of it. He created this Dungeons and Dragons combat, which is bloodless, completely divorced from violence, and has no human risk. It's incredible, right? And so this combat is combating our own deficiencies, combating the 5 chromatic dragons, right, that I just defined. And then once a person does that, everyone they meet, they're like, wait a second, this person doesn't have selfishness, they don't have ignorance, they don't have fear, they don't have hopelessness, they don't have intolerance. And organically, that person can help others to combat those deficiencies in themselves, right? And it can grow across the world. That's the combat section. The interaction section, going beyond just going beyond growing, improving, and transforming to actually interacting and having robust conversations, robust interactions with all other humans. Interaction is a pillar in Dungeons and Dragons. And how do you master it? How do you become better than anyone on the planet with it, right? Well, you see the sunrise on 30 worlds, right? You invest yourself, you identity stack 30 times. And so that to get to the point where who you are is intermixed with 30 player characters, each that have their own memories, their own sensations, their own emotions, right? And you've taken the best from them and put some of the parts of yourself into those characters and gotten rid of those sections that you didn't want, and that you are an amalgamation of 30 of the best beings that have lived across 30 different worlds, right? That's the interaction part, okay? And then finally, exploration, right? We go to the table and we're like, I'm going to go to this realm, and I'm going to go to this realm, and I'm going to go to this realm. Well, all that was Gary saying, you need a colony on Mars. You need a colony on Mars. You need a colony on Mars. You need a colony on the moon. You need a colony at the bottom, of the Marianas Trench. You need floating nations that are not bound by geography. It was just an analogy to where it was the exploration in Dungeons and Dragons, the uphill, downhill, inspired by Tolkien, is simply saying, humans, you need to explore. You need to master your world. right? You need to master exploration, and you need to go beyond your world. You need to literally explore, right? And so that is combat, interaction, and exploration. And I think, and the real conciseness of this, where I'm trying, where I'm, where I feel this lands, where some of the other things when I've tried to explain this before, is this isn't about salvation. Dungeons and Dragons can't save anyone, not a single human being, but it can fulfill every human being, particularly the secular ones, and it can fulfill even the sacred ones. They just don't need it. That it's the icing on their cake, right? They already got cake, but the seculars have no cake and no icing, right? And Gary is coming forward and saying, you'll never be saved, but you can be fulfilled, right? And that's why it's critically important for you to believe in Dungeons and Dragons. And what's wild is it was never critical for me to believe in Dungeons and Dragons because I have salvation. I'm a saved person, right? But I got the cake and I got the icing, right? And so salvation, I was incredibly fortunate to receive salvation, or to ask for and receive salvation. But at that point, fulfillment wasn't even needed because I had the greatest thing, right? But I had them fulfilled through Dungeons and Dragons, and that is incredible. I've reached heights I would have never ever reached without it, right? And I'm very happy to understand, why is it important to believe in Dungeons and Dragons? This is why, so that you can be fulfilled, right? Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The most important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.